Hello! I'm here to show you how to stretch paper over a 16 by 20 gallery wrap canvas. I use a staple gun and stainless steel staples. I'm using 10mm staples or 3/8 inch staples. Here I have a piece of Arches 640 gram paper. It is stiff as a piece of cardboard. I love the rough surface on an Arches 640, and what I'm going to do is soak it in a bathtub for a couple of minutes, and then I will stretch it over this canvas. I'll staple the paper onto the frame after I stretch it, and here I have it wet, and I've cut the long side down so that I have the right amount of overlap. I have to admit that I overlap maybe a bit more than I actually have to, but I couldn't use the excess on the long side if I cut it off. And on the short side, I probably couldn't use the excess either. And here, I really need to be able to grab hold of it to pull it over. So once the paper's wet, as thick as it was, it's so pliable. It's amazing. And what I'm doing is I'm putting a staple in. I put 3 staples in to start with on the long side. And then I push the frame towards the edge to make sure it's tight. The towel underneath really holds the piece of paper, and you can see the paper glisten in the light. I apologize for my arms here and there, but you'll see the result of my staples on some of the ones where my arm is in the way. It's hard to do this with the camera there and show you everything and not get in the way. Okay, so here I have one long side held secure, and now I'm pushing the frame hard against the long side, and I'm folding this over, and you can see how taut it is around the frame. It's not hard to do. It looks like I'm pulling really hard, which I kind of am, but you don't have to be that strong to do it. The paper really is very pliable. So I want to work fast here because the paper is drying pretty quickly. It is winter here, and I have a heater going, which means I have almost no humidity in the air. Plus the paper is being held by a towel, which invariably is drying the paper at the same time. So I'm going to quickly put a staple in between every one of my staples, but before I do, I use my thumbs and I pull the paper even more taut before I put the staple in there. So I'm stretching even more on these spaces. It's really not that hard to do. They make easier staple guns to use, air staple guns, and probably ones that are just probably easier. This is a carpenter staple gun, and it's kind of hard to squeeze. Okay, now for the tricky part, but not that tricky. I push in on the short side to almost make an equal triangle on both sides. I'm going to turn it so you can see it. And then I work to make the crease as tight as I can. And you'll see the important thing here is, remember, the front is facing down. This is the back. I'm going to fold this angle over the top, pulling tight. Again, the paper's still really wet, so it's really, really pliable. Trying to get as best a crease as I can. I'm going to go ahead and fold the other side, the other corner. Push on the short side. So I get a tight boxed corner there. I'm not speeding the camera up. I'm trying to work fast here because, again, the paper's drying. Pop a staple in there. And now I'm going to go ahead and secure the short side while I have it like this. So to push, create the crease, I'll push down on it right on the angle of the frame after I've done made the crease. Pulling it over the top, and I'm going to put a quick staple in the middle as soon as I make the crease on the corner. Again, I can use the frame and pull the paper one way while pushing with the tips of my finger on the frame the other way to make it tight. And right there, smack a staple in there. And I'll get the corners. I'll put 3 staples in here. Again, I'm just making sure I have a nice tight crease. It's hard because the paper's really thick, even though it's wet and pliable. It seems like a wrestling match, but it really isn't. So why am I doing this? Well, by doing this, I don't have to mat and frame my painting. I can paint to the edges. In fact, with a gallery wrap, I can paint on the sides. And then I can choose to either varnish or wax my finished work. It ends up being lighter. The cost ends up being a lot less for me. I get these frames for about $6 on sale, and the paper is about $6 for a sheet. So $12 plus the wax, maybe by the time you put it in, you may be $15 in totally. And if I frame it and mat it, if I don't mess up the mat with a dull blade or rip it by accident and I measure it perfectly, by the time I mat it and frame it, it's got to cost me $50 easily. So I'm way under cost here. If I had to ship this, it would be cheaper to ship because it's much lighter. It's lighter to tote around too. And the end result for me is a lot more what I'm after. So again, I'm folding the corners tight, trying to make sure the crease is where I want it. I'm going to smack a staple in there. Now I'm ready to kind of fold the last corner, and I'll try to pull really hard so that I make sure, remember, across the front, I want to make sure a long ways across the front it's as tight as possible. As my paper dries. I'm leaving this in real time so you can see how long it takes, about, I don't know, 9 minutes by the time you're done. But it's well worth it. I left the sound to do afterwards because I didn't want you to have to hear me grunting as I was snapping this thing. And just in case I stapled my finger. Which I didn't this time. No, seriously, it's not that hard to do. And look at this. The surface is just beautiful. And it's funny, I had been painting on blocks up to now. And the problem with blocks is they delaminate a lot when you're halfway through. So I intend to put a staple in between every staple that I have here before I let the paper dry. And I'll still pull all those sections before I do it. It just makes sense. I realize it's using a lot of staples, and for whatever it's worth, they're stainless steel, so they can be coated with whatever you're going to coat everything with. I went through and put a staple in between. Magically. Now I have a perfectly tight surface. It still has to dry completely, but it's like the head of a drum, and I'm ready to paint.